The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, this is Shannon Williams with Rancher Labs, and thanks for joining our training today. And we have a good crowd today, so hopefully we'll have a chance to give you a good introduction to Rancher. The session today, I'm going to be joined by Denise Shannon, our support manager, who's going to be going through a demo and introducing a lot of the technical concepts of Rancher. Denise, you want to say hi?
Hi everyone.
Hi, and I'm Shannon Williams. I'm the co-founder here at Rancher, and work with all of our customers on marketing and field issues. So today's objectives are pretty straightforward. We really wanted to help you get very quickly up to speed on how to deploy Rancher and start using it to deploy applications. The specifics today, we're going to be reasonably technical, so this is a very hands-on overview. We're going to spend the vast majority of the time actually in the product, not on slides, so we're going to sort of provide a very high-level overview of what we're covering in slides, but most of the focus is going to be hands-on and showing people how to use the system. We have we should be able to answer all of your questions. So, as we demo through this, feel free to fire away questions in the questions panel. We will be answering them as they come in. We may stop each other as questions pop in and people want to cover anything specifically. And don't worry, we're scheduled for about an hour for this training, but if there's questions you still have, we won't leave until all your questions are answered. So, take your time. We're going to go through a lot of stuff. If your question comes in and we're about to cover it, so I may send you a note and just let you know that we'll be covering that in a minute. So we may not break the flow of the training, but we'll certainly get to all of the questions before we sign off. So I want to just really quickly introduce you to a couple of primary resources to use as you're getting started with Rancher. The first are our docs. We host them all online. They're at docs.rancher.com, and they give you a very quick and detailed overview of how to get started with Rancher. So you'll find in there a quick start guide. You'll find detailed instructions on how to set up Rancher in different configurations, and we explain all of the key concepts of how to use Rancher to deploy and manage your infrastructure and apps. In addition to that, we have a forums that you can use to ask any questions. The forums are broken down by Rancher and Rancher OS. Today we're going to be talking about Rancher, not Rancher OS. So if you have Rancher OS questions, please let us know, and we'll try to answer those at the end as well. But generally, we're going to be talking about Rancher here, so feel free to dive in, and you can ask any questions you need in the forums. So in terms of what we're going to go over today, Denise is going to go through a full setup of Rancher. So she'll show you how to get started with Rancher, how to configure access control to connect to your different types of user management systems. We'll go through the concept of an environment and how to create it. We'll discuss registries and how to connect Rancher with your private registries. We'll go through talking about adding resources, hosts, and capacity into your environments, and how to do that using Docker Machine or directly just with the Rancher agent deployed on hosts. We'll be using the UI for most of the training today, but we'll also talk a little bit about the API and CLI access to Rancher. All of these are options for how you might control the system. And obviously, we'll demonstrate how to launch individual containers, create services and stacks, and launch from the Rancher catalog. And then we'll talk about Compose, Docker Compose, Rancher Compose, and what the Compose framework is and how to use that to deploy your applications. Finally, we'll talk a little bit about networking, load balancing, service discovery, external services. Maybe if we have a minute, we may chat a little bit about storage and storage services. So we'll talk through as much of the detailed infrastructure capabilities of Rancher as we have time for. So that's really it for me. I want to turn it over now to Denise, and as you're going, please fire off questions. We'll be answering them as they come in. Just use the questions tag here in GoToWebinar, and we'll be able to respond to those as they're coming in. Denise, I am going to make you the presenter.
I just stole it.
Oh, good. All right. Well, off you go then.
Okay. I just want to get started a little earlier because normally we hit up to the hour, but we've started to add so many new features that getting harder and harder to put it all in within this 1 hour. So I just want to get started as quick as possible. So the first thing I want to go to is actually I'm going to go to docs.rancher.com. This is where basically if you have any questions on how to get started, this is the best resource I think that's out there. For installing Rancher, we have how to install Rancher server. That's like the first thing you'll do is basically launch a Rancher server container. We have provided a couple of setups out there to give you. There's a single node, which is like basically using one single instance of Rancher server, and then the most basic requirement is being able to just use everything that's within our container itself, within our image. Outside of that, we also provide some details of, if you're going to use LDAP for your authentication, how to use that and set it up for TLS and pass in the certificate you're going to need, how to bind mount MySQL volume. Currently, there's a MySQL database within our container, but if you want to bind mount it to the host, if you want to use an external database, some notes about how if you're behind a proxy. From there, we can go into, there's multi-nodes, where if you want to set up an HA, we have an example that we've tested out. We are working to simplify this use case, but we have one that's out there that you can read about, how to set up SSL using Nginx or Apache. There's also under here how to do an ELB and AWS with SSL. I know there are some people out there who are trying to do that. There's some specific configuration requirements needed to do that, so I want to point out where that is so people know. As well as there's some out there that don't have any internet access, so how would you set it up? Basically, one is to pull our images into your own private registry and use that, and then once you have the couple images that you need to be able to run Rancher, then from there you can do everything internally yourself. So I've already, a couple things to note for this demo that I've already done. I have 3 boxes that I've run in GCE that are just running Ubuntu for me. I've already started, I installed Docker, so I'm running Docker 1.9.1. Basically, all I've done is take the simplest install, which is to run this command right here, which is also in our docs, of basically launching our Rancher server container, and I picked our latest release, which we just released last night, which is version 49.1. Here you can see the Docker containers running, and I launched it last night just to get ready for the demo, so that's all I've done. So this is going to be my Rancher server host, and that's all I'm going to do. After you launch the command, it usually takes maybe 1 to 2 minutes before the UI will get exposed, and the UI gets exposed to port 8080. So here is just the IP of the host that Rancher server is running on, and 8080. And once you go there, it'll automatically direct you to this page. So in this page, we have, it immediately brings you to the welcome screen to allow you to add your first host, which is what you need to do before you can add any services. But first, I'm going to talk about how to authenticate a Rancher server. So here you can click on this access control. For authentication, we have 3 different ways that you could do it. You could do it through GitHub. That's a fairly standard and easy way that we have. We have LDAP, like I discussed before. You can use LDAP over an insecure port, and you don't need to do anything special when you launch Rancher server. But if you wanted to use TLS, you need to make sure you pass in your certificate when launching Rancher server. And finally, we also have a local, so authentication, where basically you could create your own user database and passwords for whoever you want access. So when there is no access control turned on, what happens is any one of you out there could come to my IP here, and you could start playing around with my Rancher server setup. So we always recommend the first thing to do is turn it on. So I'm going to just use the local authentication because it's fairly simple to just create your own user, my name, and I'm going to just turn it on. And so now once you turn it on, basically the API and Rancher server is no longer accessible to anyone unless they have either an API key or they have an account that has been created to log into Rancher. So as the first person to authenticate this place, I am officially made as an admin and I'm logged in already. So here you can see my little login. I've logged in already. You can see that here's me as my login user, my name, and I'm of type admin. So if I wanted to add Shannon to my setup, I could do Shannon, set up a user for him, and then I have the option to basically make him either a user or an admin. So this really defines how you want like the first level of authentication. And the difference between a user and an admin is whether or not they have access to this admin tab. So I'm going to make Shannon a user because I don't want him playing around with the settings of Rancher. But what is in this admin tab? So one is how to add accounts, having the ability to change user and admins. Access control, so that's how we authenticated Rancher server. Host registration, so this is how your hosts, and we'll talk about hosts in a little bit, how they can connect to Rancher server. So basically, like what URL should they use to be able to connect when you launch your Rancher agent containers. And then a processes tab, which basically outlines what processes are running or which ones you can look and see what's already being done. This is really great for debugging, especially if Rancher seems to have some issues, to go here and see which processes are stuck so that maybe you can isolate what the problem is. So that's really the difference between admins and users. So after you kind of add in all the accounts and say you wanted to add more people, you can create as many people as you want. The next thing you would do is probably, start creating environments. So environment is basically how you isolate your resources from different groups. So we automatically create a default environment, and you're logged in as that default environment. And in that default environment, basically, we have nothing here right now, but I'm going to start adding some hosts, and then I'm going to show you what happens when I add another environment, how the hosts that I add aren't visible, and what that means. So when the first time you add a host, it's going to pop you back to this host registration page because it wants you to make sure that you know how you're going to set up your hosts communicating together. I'm going to launch some DigitalOcean hosts. I'm going to launch 3 of them. So basically in the UI here, what we have is we have a bunch of cloud providers that are out there that Docker Machine supports. And all we've done is create a friendlier user experience with Docker Machine if you've never used it, to just basically put in the parameters that are available in Docker Machine, launch it, and what we do is call a Docker Machine command for you. So I'm going to just pause my screen real quick to grab my DigitalOcean access key, start it up again, paste it. Here you can select the size, your region, all these things, and then you can add labels to your host. So I'm going to add a label to my host call this my load balancer test. I'm going to use that in a little bit to pick these hosts to launch my load balancer application that I want to do. So when you basically add in labels, and I'll go cover it a little bit, is you can create labels onto any of the hosts that you have running, and you can use those labels when you want to schedule services onto specific hosts. So this will take a little bit because Docker Machine is getting called, and what happens is first it sets up the machine, sets up calling the Docker Machine command. It will then reach out to DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean then will then start creating a droplet, and then we will SSH into the droplet, launch our Rancher agent container, and that Rancher agent container is what's used to ping between, basically communicate between these hosts here and the host where Rancher server is running. So this will take a little bit. At the same time, I have already 3 hosts that I had already set up in GCE. And what you can do there is you can basically run this adding a custom host command, which is you can add any Linux machine from anywhere, use this command, launch the Docker container of Rancher agent, and then you'll automatically pop up into Rancher Server. So for this one, I know that I've pre-populated some images just to make it a little faster. By pre-populating, I mean I just did some Docker pulls just to make it a little easier, a little faster for us. And then put some labels in to be able to schedule what I want to show a little later. You can see that whatever labels you add, we automatically update the Rancher agent command. Copy this. I'm going to go into my 3 hosts that I have, and I'll do a quick show of the images I pre-pulled. So I pulled the Rancher agent, which is what I'm about to run. I pulled Rancher agent instance. I'll talk about what that is used in a little bit, but basically that's the container we use in Rancher to be able to allow containers across hosts to communicate with each other. We use our health monitoring on it. We use that image for load balancers. So that's just something that we internally maintain. And then I pre-pulled some images that I'm going to show in my demo just so when we launch the service, we don't have to wait for those images to download as well. I'm just going to run the command for all 3. I'll close this, and here you can see a mix of my DigitalOcean hosts are coming up, and my demo agent 1 is coming up. So these are going to continue to pop up and get ready shortly. I'm going to come back to this environments page so that we can discuss. So now you can see under our infrastructure tab, under our hosts, we're now about to get 6 hosts all together. So like I was saying earlier, environments are basically a way to isolate your resources from each other, so your hosts. So this is a nice way where if you have a dev, staging, production, you could isolate them into different environments, so you could test it in one before you launch it in your other environment. I can create, say, a lab environment. I can find Shannon, add him. And when you add people to your environment, you can actually add them in a couple different roles. You could add them as a member, so basically that allows them access to the environment and basically can do anything an owner can do. The only difference is they can't actually add or remove anyone from the environment. You could put them as an owner so they could have full access to everything, including removing and adding more people to the environment. We have a read-only role, which basically means that you can see everything that's going on, but you can't actually change or modify anything. You can't launch anything new. You can't remove anything. It's like a great way to just show people what's going on, but not give them any privilege to be able to mess anything up. And then finally, we have a new restricted role. So this is a role that would allow users to be able to create their own services and launch whatever they want in our applications and our catalog, but they wouldn't be able to make any changes to your hosts. So they wouldn't be able to remove or add additional resources that containers could be launched on. So no more machines would be added. I'm going to create this environment. And here you can see I'm still logged in up in this upper right corner. I logged into the default environment. In our infrastructure page, we can see that we have our 6 hosts. If I switch over to our lab environment, you can see immediately I'm brought back to this welcome page because there are no hosts added because, as I said, they're completely separated. So you could never share in any of your hosts across environments, and there's no way to move what's in one environment to another. So it's like really separate pods of information. You can manage your environments here. You can change, say, we create a new one and that's your new default. You can set that as your default login. You can switch to environment. You can change who, by editing it, you can change who's part of it if you have that kind of permission. You can deactivate it, and then basically it'll bump you back out. So I'm going to actually just get rid of it because sometimes right now we have some funky things going on when I have 2 environments that I want to avoid for this demonstration. Okay, so now we have all of our hosts going. We will start launching services. So if you go into the applications page, if you have no services, ability to add service directly or add something from the catalog. So I'm going to add our own services first. I'm going to add my blog. My blog is really just the ghost image. So I'm going to run a Docker container that has this ghost image. Here you have the option, it's by default, to always pull the image before creating. I know a lot of people out there are constantly making changes to their image, and so they'll want the image to be repulled anytime you launch it so that you get the latest image possible. If you uncheck this, basically what it does is if your image is already cached on your host, it will use that same image and will not go retrieve a new one before launching any services on that host. So here, basically, we're doing a Docker run for our containers, and any options that you have available for Docker run should be available also in Rancher. We have some additional Rancher items that I'm going to cover. Here, I'm going to just map out, expose the port 2368. I'll actually just change this to 9000 to do something different. Launch 2 containers so you can change the scale. A service is just a scale of, you really could do 0 if you wanted, 0 to however many containers you want of the same Docker run command. Here you can change anything here. Some things that I know are good is if you want the service to only start the container once. So a lot of times we use this option if you have a database that you're just going to use, or a container that you're going to use just as a data container. We have volumes that we're going to cover a little about our Convoy agent stuff that we've just added in, networking. For networking, we have the managed network. So a lot of the functionality, this is, I know, a big point that people don't realize, a lot of functionality that we've added in, like load balancing, health monitoring, those all require the managed network. So if you choose to do something else, then it may not work. You can also select host networking, which gives you the option to be able to add the service as part of our internal Rancher DNS discovery. That is by default part of the managed network. Security host option, so you could add in your own user data, and that will add in metadata onto the service itself. Rancher provides a health monitoring system, so you can add a health check to your service, which basically if you do TCP, it'll basically ping that port of the container. If it's accessible, then it will assume that that container is healthy. Once it becomes unhealthy, it will start to reschedule that container onto maybe a different host. Say something went bad with your host, and now your containers are no longer actually reachable. The health check allows you to set that up. You could add labels. Labels here are key value pairs, just like our host labels, where you could do scheduling. And here is the scheduling that I keep mentioning. I haven't actually shown you, where basically you can create rules to schedule anything that you want. So here I could say the host, you could do any either hard or soft affinity rules. You could do host label, container label, service names, container names. Here we pre-populate what labels are available, so we could go to and to do the blog equals true host. So those are those hosts that I've already pre-pulled the images for my Ghost service. Create that, and I'm going to launch it. You can launch services by either playing for the whole stack or the individual service itself. I'm going to start it here. So what a stack is just a collection of services. So you could group, it's purely an organization tool where if you have a couple of services that are part of an application, you can group them into one stack so it's easy to see. Later you can see as we add in stacks, you'll be able to see kind of your different applications that you have. And it's a nice way to be able to say, like, we can sort them by the state of the service or the name to see if something's degraded, which means, you know, one of the services in the stack, something's wrong with it, it'll populate the fact that it's also degraded at the stack level. So here we have our blog running. You can see it says 2 containers. And now we can have this, since I exposed this port 9000, I can now easily click on this, and it actually automatically directs me to one of the host IPs that is hosting my blog container, my Ghost container, and it brings me the port, and this automatically redirects me into the container which has the port 2368 exposed. So the port mapping is working. We're all in the container. It's great. So here I have the ability, I can click on this little information sign. This gives you a nice summary of what's going on with your service. So here you can see what image I had used. You can see how many containers. If I hover over them, you can see the container names. If I right-click on them, I could make changes to the containers itself. You can see over here, these are the hosts and the ports that are available if I wanted to click on these individual ones. If you wanted to see more details about your service, you could either click on View Details here, or you could click on the service name from the stack page. In the detailed page, we get a little fancier where you can see all the list of ports you have and all the host IPs that it's going to link to. I can see all the containers. I can see the stats of the containers. You can see what's going on, what labels we've already put in, and if there are any links to this that you've added to the service itself. So here, let's go back here to our stack. I'm going to click on info. So like I discussed earlier, we only scheduled it to be able to go to where the blog equals true application. So if I scale my service to 3, I will be able to hit this demo agent 3 box. Whenever the first service is launched, we automatically launch this container called network agent. So the network agent is that Rancher agent instance image is being used, and that's what we use to be able to ping across different hosts. So to enable that communication, you need to open up ports 500 and 4500 on UDP to be able to get the IPsec tunneling working. So if I wanted to exec into the container here, I can ping the other network agent container. You can see it faintly here where it says 10.42.136.204. There'll be usually a small delay for the first initial ping, but after that, it'll work right away. So now it's kind of cool. So now basically any containers in this host can automatically communicate with the containers in the other host. So I'm going to scale up once. You can see that it's saying it's degraded because it's trying to get the other container of my scale of 3 to get going. You can see that it's launching already on our demo agent 3, and it's already up and active. So now we have 3 containers running. So now what happens is because I put that scheduling rule, that hard affinity to say it must be on a host that says blog equals true, I actually don't have any more hosts that actually have it. So of my 6 hosts, only 3 of them have it. So if I try to scale up, what will happen is it'll get stuck in an activating state, so it'll say that it's degraded because it can't find that fourth container. So what we'll do is I will add, you can always add a label later. I'm going to add a label to say blog equals true to this host. And in a little bit, the scheduler should pick up the fact that I've added, there's now another host out there that could actually launch that container. And you can see it's already starting to go. This one will take a little bit longer to get going because I just created these DigitalOcean hosts. It's going to have to pull the Rancher agent instance image first and launch that container, and then it will pull my blog, my ghost container, my ghost image, and launch that container. So we'll let that going and come back to it in a little bit, and I'll be working fine. So my next one I'm going to show is how to use our load balancer. So I'll call it our application 1. Create it. So I'm going to create this service, which is an NGINX application, but I'm actually going to use my coworker's image that she has that's public out there. All it is the NGINX Docker files from NGINX, and all she did was basically add the ability to go to a specific URL, and it will point to what the container IP is. not the container IP, the container ID. So here, there's nothing else I want to do. I'm just going to say I'm going to schedule it to be my hosts that have my NGINX app to true. Those are just the hosts that I had pre-populated with image. Next, I'm going to add a load balancer. So our load balancer is running HAProxy software. What we recommend for a load balancer is usually I like to pick always run one instance on every host, because since we're exposing ports on a host, a port can never be exposed multiple times on a host. So you know, you really will only be able to run one instance on every host. I'm going to expose port 8000. I'm going to point it to port 80. That's the port that's exposed on the NGINX app container. I'm going to select the application to target the traffic to that container. And I'm actually going to schedule these on specifically the hosts. These are all my DigitalOcean hosts, onto the hosts that will not actually have the application itself running. Oh, got to provide it a name. And here you can see our application. If I go into that graph, now normally there is a line that directs it. I don't know why it's not there right now. I'll have to look into that a little later, but let's go back. Our blog service is all 4 are up and running, so that means we're good. Let's go back to our stacks. Here, you can see I can just push start services of all my stacks that I have, which I'm going to do. And basically, anywhere where the load balancer gets run, it's going to redirect the traffic to the NGINX. So in our infrastructure page, you can see our load balancers are starting to deploy on all the hosts that have LB test equals true. This one's initializing. We'll let that get going. So while we let this service to get up, and I'll show you, I promise to come back to show you how that service and how the load balancer redirects the traffic. I just want to talk about the UI and the API and the different tools we have. So the UI is basically making API calls to Rancher Server. So there's nothing special about the UI, nothing that we've done, you know, fancy in it. It really is just calling any API call that exists. The API can be found in your little user dropdown under API and keys. Direct it to this endpoint, or you could go to Rancher Server /v1, and that will bring you to the API. So this API brings you specifically to the environment that we have here. We have some API and UI terminology differences that we are going to correct in our V2 of our API. But we'll go into here. So basically, projects in the API is environments here. So we are in that default environment right now. And from the API, you can basically do anything that you're able to do in the UI. So I know there are a lot of people out there who want to be able to create their own scripts to do things. You can certainly do that with the API. Let's see, what is one that I usually like to be able to do. You can add where our service is. Oh, here it is. If I go into services, you can see the different services that we have available. Here, I can create your own different type of services that we have available and put in a launch configuration. So I will be honest, I'm not a great user of the API, so I'm not the best person to actually tell you how to use it, but we do have some in our documentation. We just added an API section, so you would be able to get a feel of how does the API work and what are some of the resources that you would use to launch hosts, launch services out there. Outside of the API, we also have our CLI, which is Rancher Compose. You can download that in the applications page over here on the On the right side, you can download it for whatever operating system you're running. I'm running a Mac, so I'm going to download it for my Mac. And we'll talk about how to use Rancher Compose in just a little bit. Now I'm going to go back just to my service. Here you can see my load balancer, which is directing traffic to Nginx application, is running. I can go to the port itself. Here you can see it's already redirected it to the Nginx container. But if I actually go into that URL that I talked about earlier, it'll pull up what the container ID is. So let's find out where this container ID is. Let me pull up, do a Docker PS on the 3 hosts that have, this application, this container running. So here we're looking for a 6.4b, and here I'm on, you can see I'm on demo agent 1. 6.4b does not look to be running on this one. If I go to demo agent 2, it doesn't look like it's running on this one. And so here on demo agent 3, you can see it's actually running here. So if I do a refresh of the page, the traffic should be redirected to another container. So here we have ABF. ABF is not on demo agent 3. Here ABF is on demo agent 2. So you can see which ones I'm going between. And so basically, as we click refresh, it should redirect the traffic to the different containers we have running. So now 7.4d is the first container on demo agent 1. Some things I didn't talk about the load balancer previously. I'm going to just go back real quick. So you can target to just go directly to the container of where the exposed port is. For your URL, you could go to the host IP and then the port that you had exposed on the load balancer. Or you could, you can make it real fancy and create different host name routing rules. So basically, you can give it a host, a request host, a request path, different source ports or target ports per service. One thing I know a lot of people out there will try to use one load balancer to direct your services, and the assumption is that basically I'll give an example real quick. If I have 2 services out there and I wanted actually all my traffic of 80, it actually has a note now. So basically what I wanted to explain is that, if you put in these 2 services, there's no way to say I only want, there's no direct way to basically say I only want my Nginx, anything that comes to the load balancer at port 80 to go only to my Nginx target service. You can do it where if you put some like dummy host path into it for your Nginx to say to block up the other port that you don't want it to use. So if I put in through there, basically this will force the load balancer to redirect your traffic from 80 to this target service. But outside of that, it will round robin between all the services that you have available. That's something that's been coming up more recently. Okay, so now I'm going to jump to Rancher Compose. So we just recently downloaded Rancher Compose. So what Rancher Compose is our interpretation of Docker Compose. So basically, we actually use Docker's libcompose, which is the Go variation of Docker Compose. It's something that we primarily had a handing in contributing to. And what we do is we allow it so that you can use a Docker Compose YAML file and launch that into Rancher Compose directly. So if you're already using Docker Compose, all you need to do is a couple changes you can use, and then you use our Rancher Compose tool, and then it will launch the services into Rancher itself. Here in my application 1 stack, there's a view where you can look at the compose YAML file. So here we have a Docker compose file. If you put this into a Docker compose and run a Docker compose command, it would automatically launch and not have any issues. We also have a corresponding Rancher compose YAML file. And in this Rancher compose YAML file, these are the things that basically Docker compose doesn't really support. So we have, a scale. So in Docker compose, to be able to scale, you have to actually launch a service and then use another Docker compose command to actually scale it. Here we allow the ability to set your scale immediately upon calling a Rancher compose up. Here we put in our health checks. So load balancers automatically get a health check to make sure that you're able to ping between any places where the load balancer is running. I'm going to open up the Rancher compose file. Let's navigate to where I've downloaded it. And here you can see I have my binary out there to be able to start using. So I'll call the Rancher compose command. There are 3 environment variables that you as a user can set on your setup so that you don't have to pass it into the command. The first one is the Rancher URL. I pass it into the command itself because I'm always using different boxes. So for me to have to set up a new environment variable is just as much time as for me to actually pass on the command. Because the API is locked, you will need to create an API key to be able to use with the command. So now in my API key, it's just basically a username and password. I forgot a space. Username and passwords, which will basically tell Rancher compose which environment you have access to and where you should launch your services. And then I'll pass in a name, and I'm going to do an up. But what you're going to see is I actually forgot to set my Docker compose file. So you can create your Docker compose file either locally in this directory. You can have it in a different directory and point to it. I'm going to basically take this load balancer application 1 that we did earlier, take that Docker compose and copy it in. I'm going to change this port to a different one just so that we don't have a port conflict, so I'll be able to keep running on the same host. I'm going to create a Rancher compose file. A Rancher compose file is actually optional, so if you don't provide one or if you have a service that is not included in your Rancher compose file, that's okay. We'll just automatically start the service with a scale of 1. So now if I do my up, get back to our stacks page, you can see our compose test stack was already created. It's already starting up my Nginx service, and then it's going to start up the load balancer service. So, basically the service that I created in the UI here, I was able to, with the Rancher compose CLI, able to just launch, one command and set up my services the same. What's going on with there's just a small delay, and it's actually all up and running already. Once again, I'll go to the port that it's exposed to. This is just one of the hosts. There's multiple hosts that it could select. And click. You should see that the IP or the container ID is changing. Okay, so that's probably the basics of Rancher. And now I'm going to start going into some other things that we've added in more recently. So next is our catalog entries. So basically, what we've done is we've created these essentially Docker compose, Rancher compose templates that will allow you to launch some services that are out there that might be a little more complicated to get set up. And we've created these templates so it's really easy to be able to set up for you. So I'm going to launch this Gluster FS stack. I'm going to keep the default the same. You are welcome to change it to whatever you want. It's going to create a new stack and launch the services in there. In this preview section, you are able to see what is in the template itself. If you say wanted to make changes, you could, it's your choice to copy these into your own where you're launching Rancher Compose and launch it in Rancher Compose itself. Otherwise, most people just look at it, make maybe some changes here, and you can launch it. I'm going to launch the GlusterFS, and it's going to start going and basically start picking some hosts to just start launching on. I'm going to let that continue for catalog. I'm going to also launch Convoy Gluster. This is one of the latest features that we added in. It's really how to use Docker volumes across different containers using Convoy Gluster. It's going to have to reference our GlusterFS application. So I'd rather have this up and running before we start going. I'm going to actually go and show you another thing we have enabled for catalog is basically how do upgrades work in catalog. So here I picked Elasticsearch Stack. This is a stack that has 2 versions out there in the GitHub repo. I'm going to launch the older one so you can see how Rancher itself will look to see if there are new templates available and provide you that option to upgrade. So here you can see it has upgrade available, whereas if I switch to GlusterFS, it's up to date because this is the latest version. So while Elasticsearch is going, once the stack is up and running, I will show you how I can just quickly click on the upgrade button, and that will upgrade the stack for me, and it'll upgrade all the services that have changed. After you make an upgrade, you could always have the ability to roll back if you want. You can actually do that with one of our, it's not only available for services, but you could do what we call an in-service upgrade. So basically, if you have a service, say I realized I wanted this port to actually change. Or okay, say I have this service here. I want to upgrade my service. And I can change, I could say I want it linked to other service. Basically, we'll do another Docker run command to replace the service. Here you have the batch size of how many containers do you want launched at a time when you're replacing containers. How many seconds do you want in between launching containers, whether or not you want to start your new containers before stopping your old ones. All the options of creating an image exist as before. After you launch your upgraded, here I'm going to do this one because you can actually see what happens. I can upgrade it. I'm going to change my port. I'm going to say, oh, let's actually change it to the port that's available there. Click on upgrade. And it should come back. There's a small delay. So here's in the upgrading state. Everything is still activating, running. Let's take a peek. I've now just started requesting a lot from my different hosts that we have out here, and you can see it's just downloading images. It takes time, and then it's going to launch my services. So this is, okay, so in GlusterFS, this is a good time to see what is a sidekick and how is it displayed in the UI. So a sidekick is just how you would want to, if you ever wanted to do volumes from another container, you would need to give it a sidekick label so that Rancher knows to always launch where you're going to get the volumes from container and your primary container together onto the same host. So it ends up being a configuration that is launched together as kind of like a grouped pair. So here for the GlusterFS server, we have 3 other sidekick containers that are also launched on the same host. And here you can see that there's how many sidekicks are available in the sidekicks. You can see what their names are. You can right-click on them. You can do different things to get into the container. So just because something is, not running yet, or it says degraded, you would want to go see which of your services which of your containers or services in that one main service has any issues. So our GlusterFS looks like it's up and running. I'm actually going to then launch our Convoy Gluster. Hopefully I will have enough time because this is one of I think this is one of the cool things that we just added in. So here, the only thing that you have to do in your configuration options is pick the GlusterFS server that you're running. So basically the services that is running GlusterFS. I'm going to change this. So one thing is I don't currently have any hosts that have the label convoy.glusterfs equals true. I know I have a host label that says blog equals true, so I'm going to specify that. If you don't have the label on it already, I mean, you could always leave it as is, launch it, and add the labels afterwards. But for the speed of time, I'll just pick one that I know we already have a label, and it will start to get activated, download the image, and get going. Go back to our stacks page to see what's going on. So we have our default where I had tried to individually upgrade my blog. You can see it's in an upgraded state. You can see the port has changed here. Click on it to make sure that that service is running correctly. We leave it in this upgraded state so that you can always test to see if your upgrade worked. If it didn't work, you have the option to roll back, to go back to your previous, or you can say you want to finish the upgrade and actually upgrade and say that this is the final state. So I'm going to say finish upgrade, and that is back into active state. So let's see, Convoy Gluster is still running. Hopefully we can get that up and running. I can show you the cool things there. I will tell you, Shannon, it's definitely getting hard to fit everything into this 1 hour with all our new features.
I think we're gonna have to start cutting out some of the stuff into the training, but so far so good. I think there's a couple questions that have come in, but you've hit all of the things as we've been going. So I think you're hitting the right topics. Anything else you want to go through? I think we can probably start wrapping it up, Denise.
I could. Well, what do you think? I could go over how to use Convoy Gluster, or I mean, there is an example on the documentation. I know we're running close to the hour.
Yeah, I think it'd be better off to let some of that be described in the docs. There's a question that came in though that we didn't answer. Just came in now. Someone asked about supporting IPv6, and right now we don't support IPv6. Obviously, within the Rancher networking, the virtual network itself, it's sort of a virtual network just created among the hosts. So it's an IPv4. We're looking at supporting IPv6 for the hosts, but today, no, we don't support IPv6. Be interested in, if you'd like to shoot an email over to me at shannon@rancher.com, I'd be happy to chat with you a little bit about your requirements and see what the use case looks like and how you'd like to use IPv6, because it's definitely an area we've been talking about and thinking about, and we've had a few other people ask about. So yeah, please shoot me an email if you'd like to go into that in more detail. Otherwise, I think we've covered quite a bit, Denise. If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to take back the presentation. I just want to show a couple other resources really quickly that might be useful for people to consume. So I'm going to make myself the presenter, and give me 1 second. I'm just going to pull up my environment. One of the things that we have that tends to be very useful for people in our beta and participating in the training. Denise, can you see my screen?
I can now. I was just going to tell you, but now I can.
Okay, great. We have a really nice monthly monthly meetup that we run every month, where we cover all sorts of different types of topics, and you can find it in our About events section. This month, next week, we're going to be doing a detailed meetup on how to run Rancher on Amazon, and we have a lot of people using Rancher on Amazon. So we run these meetups. They're online, but once we're finished with them, we record them, and you can actually view the recording of any of our previous meetups. You can see they go back to March, but we basically run one every month. They cover all sorts of very detailed examples, including using things like Rancher VM, which we didn't talk about today, to create VMs, and there's some on Rancher OS. You'll find some really detailed concepts on things like using Rancher with your CI/CD deployments, where we demonstrate using Rancher with Drone and how we do that ourselves. We have some on storage and Convoy if you'd like to get into a little more detail there. But some of the more recent ones that would be, I think, very useful for people cover things like logging and monitoring in depth. So as you start looking at how to monitor your Elk stack, in a meetup like this would be very helpful. And you should take a look at the meetup we did with Sysdig in October. You can learn all about it. And all of these are recorded. If you just kind of pull up into them, you can see a full recording of the meetup. Some of these go for an hour or two, but you can sort of skip around and see the different concepts that we cover in the meetup. So definitely take a look at those, and hopefully it will help you understand a little bit more detail on how to do some of the more advanced stuff inside of Rancher. But otherwise, thank you all very much for attending today, and hopefully this was an educational training. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to post them on our forums. You can also email us at info@rancher.com, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And feel free to respond to the invite you got to this, and we'll certainly respond there as well if you'd prefer. Otherwise, Denise, thanks for an excellent demonstration, and thanks everyone for attending today's meetup.
Thanks, everyone.